Holy shit, dragons are good again. Alright, enough memes. What's up, guys? Mike Thomas, aka the Young Trishula here, and as you guys have probably already seen, there was a major Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG Banlist that was dropped the other day that completely changes the whole format, and this is coming right after the release of Photon Hypernova, as well as right before YCS Las Vegas, which is really impactful for players such as myself who will be participating in that event. Now, I am a little bit late to the party in terms of like a ban list reaction. I was going to make a video the day that the ban list dropped, but unfortunately I had some life stuff come up and I just was not able to get out a video until now. So hopefully you're still interested in hearing me talk about the ban list, because that is what we are going to be doing today. Though for the sake of the video, I am going to assume that you have probably already seen the ban list. I'm not going to spend much time really reacting to it. I'm going to go over the ban list, talk about my thoughts on some of the hits, and then talk more about my general thoughts on the format and where I think it's headed. But before we get into the video, as always, remember to like and subscribe if you do enjoy this kind of content. It really does help me out a lot, and it tells me to keep making more of it. Also, before we begin, I do just want to take a second to mention that I did recently just start a VODs channel on YouTube. We recently had our best month ever over on Twitch, and I did just want to create a place to archive some of these streams and share them with everybody, because not everyone can always make all of my Twitch streams. Some of you don't even know that I do stream. I stream quite often over on Twitch at twitch.tv/TrishilaTTV. Definitely go check that out. I will put the link down in the description as well as the pinned comments. And the first video should be going up sometime later today, I think. So do keep an eye on that. But there's just so much content that we have produced over on Twitch that never makes it over to YouTube. And a lot of people have asked me whether or not I'm going to have a VODs channel, so now we do. So go check that out. But anyway, without wasting any more of your time, let's get into the ban list. Alright, so starting off the ban list, we have the two bans of Artifact Scythe and Barrier Statue of Stormwinds. I think these bans are totally fine. Personally, I don't think these cards were doing too much in this format. Scythe, Scythe was more of a jump scare, sometimes it happened, but I'm glad that this card is gone. This card has never been used for anything other than evil. Same with Barrier Statue of Stormwinds. That's really more of just a hit to Flunder more than anything else, but Flunder I honestly think was starting to get power crept out by something like Kashtira anyway, so I don't think losing Stormwind is too relevant, but I'm still regardless glad to see it gone. More floodgates leaving the game, I'm always happy about. Now we get down to the big bans of Tearlament, Kit Kalos, and Sprite Elf. I think that as far as Kit Kalos is concerned, I think we all saw this coming. This card was banned in OCG and is just insanely powerful in the Tearlaments deck. It's a mill 5, the same as Chaos Ruler. It's a search, it's a summon. Kit Kalos does everything, but losing it for Tearlament really hurts the deck. It means that they don't have a great first fusion to go into. It's a little bit better over here in TCG because we have Garura, so you could use that to draw a card, but it really hurts the tier deck to not have that Kit Kalos to get the engine going, because a lot of times that initial mill 5 is kind of what got the deck jump started. So losing that really cripples the deck, but not uncalled for, I would say. Sprite Elf, on the other hand, I think some players might be more surprised by. As OCG did not choose to ban this card, they still have it completely legal, though I do think that this card being banned is completely justified. I think this card was super crazy that it was generic, that you could splash it in anything. So many degenerate combos could be created with Sprite Elf, especially, looking forward to the future. This card would be defining the game for years if it was still in the meta. I think Jesse Cotton in one of his recent videos compared this card to Nightmare Goblin, and I think that is more than a fair comparison for this card. Just being able to protect cards from targeting that really shouldn't be protected from targeting is just super oppressive. So really glad that it's gone, though it does hurt Sprite a decent amount. You know, the reborn effect off of Sprite Elf is, in my mind, what made a lot of Sprite variants really scary, because in my mind, the scariest thing about Sprite was usually the Totally Awesome and them being able to bring it back and negate you twice. So now, if they do make a Totally Awesome, they can't bring it back, so it's probably not worth investing into a Toad anymore. And they also can't bring back a Sprite Blue or Sprite Jet on your turn, so to give themselves follow-up for the next turn. So I think what this means in terms of Sprite is that we are going to see more Sprite variants pop up rather than pure Sprite as the optimal build, be that something like Runic Sprite or Live Twin Sprite, even Tri-Brigade Sprite. I think all of those decks have more potential now that Sprite Elf is gone, as opposed to the pure Sprite deck, which I think has lost probably its best card. So that's about it for the bans. So moving down to the limits, this is where the ban list gets really crazy. So limited, we have Yugioh, we have Kelbeck, we have Keldo, we have Mudora, Havnis, Merly, Shaylin. All of the tier fusion names and all of the Ishizu cards are limited. This is so impactful. I don't even have words to begin to describe. In OCG hit Tearlaments a lot. They banned Kit Kalos, they limited Rhino, they semi'd Havnis, they limited Shaylin. I think they limited Rhino Heart. I'm not sure on that one, but they, you know, we always thought that deck was eviscerated over there. Over here, I think it's actually worse because all of the Ishizu cards are limited for us. In OCG, they have 3 Kelbeck, they have 3 Mudora. I think they have multiple copies of Keldo. It might be 2 Keldo. It might be 1 Keldo, 1 Yugioh. I'm not 100% positive what that ratio is. I just know that they have enough to where they can still play an Ishizu core in their deck. For us, our Ishizu core is now 4 cards, on top of all of the Tearlament names being limited to 1. In OCG, they still have 3 Merly, they have 2 Havnis, they have 1 Shaylin. The fact that we only have 1 of each name is so huge, because now, if you get hit with a Bestial on any Tearlament name, you cannot use that Tearlament name ever again for the rest of the duel, unless you have something like a Tearlament Crime hit graveyard and add it back from Banished. That is just so crazy that you can limit the deck's ceiling permanently through 1 Bestial effect, that I don't know how this deck is going to attempt to recover as a pure strategy anymore. I really don't know. There's stuff that you can do with Tearlaments. You can still try to play it. There's some kind of cope variants out there. You know, you can play it with Kashtira like the way OCG did, but again, you know, you're still just setting yourself up for disappointment, I think, because the second any of your Tearlament names get hit, you're out of that card for the rest of the game. Not only that, too, what are you fusing into when you fuse with these cards? Like, even if you get them to fuse, what are you going to fuse into? Because you don't have Kit Kalos anymore. So you really need King of the Swamp in order to really get value out of these Tearlament fusions. And if you don't open the King of the Swamp, or unless you open a way to extend into putting it into the graveyard from the deck, you're not really getting, you know, the most value out of these tier fusions. You know, it's nice that we have Garura where OCG doesn't, so we can get draws, but without Sprite Elf, you don't really have a good generic Link 2 to go into on your first turn, and you don't necessarily have the space to play a bunch of Link 2s. So Tearlament seems pretty weak, and I think the thing that really kind of puts the nail in the coffin for the deck is the limit of the Ishizu cards, because in OCG, even with the crippled state of the deck, they are still able to play the deck because they have multiple Kelbecks, they have multiple Mudoras. So if they do start milling, if they do get their engine going, they at least have stuff that they can hit. In TCG here, it is unlikely that if you start milling that you're gonna hit something good. You're probably not hitting a Tearlament fusion name off of a blind mill unless you get lucky, and you're probably not hitting a Miller off of the Ishizu engine, and you only have 1 Mudora and 1 Keldo, so you have to be really careful about how you use those cards now. All of that just feels really bad. So I think Tearlament might just end up becoming a sub-engine for other archetypes, other fusion archetypes in the future. You know, I really just don't see it having the same kind of staying power that it had before. Now, don't get me wrong, I still think the deck is potentially viable, but I think that it's going to be doing a lot to try. I think it's going to be doing the most to just get on the board. You know what I mean? It's going to go through a lot of hoops to start playing, and I'm not sure if that means that it's going to be better than other options that we're going to have. Though I'm excited to see what people might come up with this, especially players like Jesse, who, you know, are great at breaking decks. So really excited to see what people come up with, but I just don't have faith right now. Another interesting one is Ancient Fairy Dragon. Is now unbanned with its errata. However, we cannot use it until after March 10th. So it is still banned for YCS Las Vegas, which is kind of unfortunate because I actually really like Ancient Fairy Dragon. I think there is some cool stuff that you can do with this card, but unfortunately it's not an option for Vegas. So a little bit of a disappointment that we can't use it right now. So that's all the cards that were limited. There were no new semi-limits, and then we got some unlimits coming with Destrudo coming back to 3. I don't think that changes too much, but it is interesting to note in terms of something like Tearlament having this is a good card to mill. You know, this definitely is a good card to mill. So this gives you options for that deck. Jet Synchron coming back, that's cool. You know, we don't have Hulk anymore, so Jet Synchron as a normal summon isn't crazy anymore. Same with O-Lion, Halcdon is dead, so we don't have any need for these cards to be on the ban list. Servant of Endymion, more Pendulum cards coming back to 3. I think that's fine. You know, they have Endymion at like more than full power on Master Duel, and the deck is still kind of mid, so it makes sense. Lithosagem coming back to 3 is interesting. Lithosagem was always the scary True King, being able to pop double baby and then loop your opponent's extra deck. But now, because Kashtira just as a deck does that inherently, I guess this is fine to come back. Yatagarasu also coming back to 3. No big surprise, nobody's playing Yatagarasu. Spiral Resort coming back to 3 is also fine. We don't have Master Plan, so that doesn't really do anything. So, Banlist for the most part was really just a big tier nerf. Just a big nuke to Tearlament with, I guess, a little bit of collateral damage in Sprite Elf and Barrier Statue. So now, I guess the interesting part about this is when we can talk about it. So, with obviously the first place to start talking about is Tearlament. As I said before, I really think that the deck is gonna kind of start to take a back seat. I think we might see a few of them top YCS Las Vegas. I'm sure people will find a way with the deck. It is still a good deck in OCG, but as I was saying before, you know, the limits of the Ishizu cards really hurt the deck. Same with the limits of all the Tearlament cards in OCG. I actually think they're better off over there than we are over here in the TCG in terms of Tearlament. And that kind of leaves the question as to low, what is the best deck? I think the obvious place to look is to Kashtira, because it was a deck that could compete with full power Ishizu Tearlament with no hits in Photon Hypernova format, and it received no hits on the ban list anywhere. So that deck is at completely full power. I think one thing that we have to think about is that Kashtira also lost its best matchup in Tearlament. So it's still good by pure card quality. It's still good, but it's not the same level of meta impact that it did before. And I think one thing about that can be relevant is that now there's a wider diversity of decks, and a wider diversity of decks that Kashtira might not be able to cover every single one of those matchups. So I think it means that in terms of a tier 1 deck, it's not going to be overly oppressive. Especially from having played against the deck, it doesn't feel that good of a best deck, if that makes sense. It feels very fair for being the best deck in the format. And it kind of reminds me of when Branded Despia first came out, and that was the best deck, where it was like, oh, well, if I draw Ash, you know, I can just, it's my turn now. And You know, Kashtira feels kind of the same way with them not putting up any Omni Negate, so you can freely Nibiru them, you can freely hit them with board breaking cards. Book of Eclipse is really strong into them. You know, there's so many options into the Kashtira deck that I am not entirely convinced that that deck is going to be oppressive to a point where you have to play that deck, you know, or you know, feel like you're at a disadvantage. Another deck that I think is gaining a lot of traction right now, or getting a lot of attention, is Branded Despia, funnily enough, because they did get new support. And on top of that, it seemingly has actually a pretty good Kashtira matchup, because you have access to stuff like Super Poly to break their board, and you also have the ability with Branded Fusion to start cracking their board. I believe with the new fusion monster that Branded Despia got, I believe Lindworm is actually pretty good into their established board. And the fact that Arise Heart, the Arise Heart macro effect doesn't really affect Branded Despia too much. So I think it's actually a pretty viable deck, all things considered. Similarly, I think people are looking at decks from last nationals such as Sword Soul, which personally I don't think is quite as good. I don't really respect Sword Soul without Protos that much, but I do think, you know, it's a very versatile and flexible strategy, and I think you can probably make it work. I've seen some interesting builds of the deck running around, so I'm curious to see how it performs, though it wouldn't be my first pick. Also, I think we would be remiss to not mention Sprite. I think Sprite as a pure variant, as I was saying before, is probably not as good as it was, but I think that Sprite is still a really good engine, and Sprite variants are probably pretty good. I think Runic Sprite is definitely a solid contender for one of the best decks in the format, because it was already a YCS winning deck before we got Ishizu Tearlaments. And the thing is that now that the Ishizu cards have kind of left the format to some extent, Runic gets a lot better. The Ishizu cards were gatekeeping Runic because you could never resolve Fountain, because your cards would just get targeted and shuffled away, and Fountain would never resolve. But now that those cards don't exist, Runic is just free to dominate once again, and that is really terrifying conceptually. It sounds really annoying, especially to me, having played so much Master Duel recently. I am really sick of those cards. I really do not want to enter another format where I have to play against Runic decks constantly, but I genuinely think that those cards are good and are going to see play, whether I want them to or not. And you know, so I think that that's something to definitely keep an eye on. I think, you know, losing the Sprite Elf is bad for those decks, but it is not, and it's not the end of the world by any stretch of the imagination. But now that we've talked about all of those decks, I think it's time that we discuss my favorite deck, my baby, being Dragon Link. I think Dragon Link is in an interesting spot, at least in terms of the Nationals decks that are coming back. Dragons was the best deck in Nationals format. In that format, it was by far and away the best choice for that event, and it has such good matchups into Sword Soul and Despia that if those decks become really popular, Dragons can find purchase in this new format by virtue of beating those decks. Where I think Dragons might struggle is into the other two decks we were talking about just now, being that doesn't appreciate losing its main deck cards to banish effects from the opponent. So it doesn't appreciate playing against Kashtira, and it doesn't appreciate playing against Runic Sprite. Those were not favorable matchups for Dragon Link. And Kashtira can be really annoying. Dragons in general does not deal with Macrocosmos very well, and it especially does not deal with something like Mind Hacker very well, where they're just whipping your Striker Dragon out of your extra deck before you even get a chance to play, and now you have lost the best card in your extra deck, and it's going to be very hard for you to start your play and recover for the rest of the duel. So I think Kashtira is a very bad matchup if you go second. I think if you go first, it's probably pretty fine, because I don't think they have an out to Borland if you set it up. But with cards like Thrusting and Tactics running around in the format, it doesn't seem super favorable. The bestial cards don't seem super great into opposing decks. They're just more of engine now for you. So dragons feels like it's kind of in an awkward spot. Having lost so many things, it feels like it will be a little bit difficult for it to move into the new format. That's not to say that dragons will be bad in the new format, though I think it will take some time for dragons to become established in this format. Dragons is always a deck that gets better as a format progresses. And with it being so early in the format, I think it's really hard to say how dragons would have to combat the format. I think we have to wait a little while to kind of see where the format is headed before I can realistically say dragons is good. I don't think dragons necessarily is the right call for Vegas, but it might be, is where I would put it. I think that it needs to figure out its Kashtira matchup. I think it needs to assess how common Runic Sprite is, and I think that it needs to try to take advantage of people playing Despia and Sword Soul. So the stars might align for it to be good at Vegas if a lot of people choose to play Despia and Sword Soul, and the stars might align for it to get better after Vegas if the format, like once the format becomes more defined. But it's really hard to say where dragons are going to fit into this current meta, because they do have a bad matchup in the supposed best deck, and they do have really good matchups into the other supposed good decks of the format. So it's in a weird spot. I think dragons are still dragons. If you know how to pilot them well, you can usually pilot through anything, but it just depends on what cards people are playing so that you know exactly how to build your deck and what cards to pilot around. I think that's where I would leave it for dragons. But that about concludes my thoughts on the ban list. Do let me know down in the comment section below if you agree or disagree with any of my takes on the format, or if you think there's anything that I've forgotten or overlooked in my little discussion of this ban list. Also, do remember to drop a like and subscribe if you haven't already. It really does help me out a lot. And remember to go check out the VODs channel. Go subscribe to that, because that way you can never miss a stream. I do stream on Twitch quite often. We have a lot of fun over there. And I think if you are not familiar with the Twitch channel, you will see the fun that we have over there by checking out the VODs. Or if you are a Twitch regular and you aren't able to catch a stream, or you want to go back and watch an old stream, they're all going to be there now. So definitely something to go check out. But I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you in the next one.